Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well today. It's good to see all of you here. And before I move into the message, I feel compelled to say a couple of things. This week we had some tragedies that took place in our nation. And, first of all, the Charlie Kirk assassination. Man, I've struggled with this thing this week. I don't know how many of you have. But I believe Charlie was my brother in Christ. And whether you agreed with everything that he said or not, it really doesn't matter, because he said he believed in Jesus and he's my brother. Now, what does it say about a culture that someone wanted to kill him over words? Most of the words he spoke are words that I would agree with. Now, does that mean that someone would want to kill me because I agree with a lot of the things that he said, especially about Jesus? Now, there is a culture of hate that says if you disagree with me, you are worthy of death. And many people in our culture are actually celebrating the death of this man. He was not a killer. He wasn't violent. He gave people who disagreed with him a chance to voice their thoughts and debate him. And so I'm very sad over my brother in Christ being murdered because somebody didn't like his message. And I'm sad that many people are rejoicing over his death. And then something that got sort of lost in that whole thing was that on the same day in Denver, Colorado, a 16-year-old student went and shot up his school. And thankfully, only 2 students were injured. And then he killed himself. Man, Satan has a grip on people, doesn't he? And I would say, as Charlie Kirk said numerous times, the only thing that matters is Jesus. Amen. He said that so many times. And then a third, and maybe less of a newsworthy event, was the passing of Ed Hobby yesterday. Probably most of you don't know who Ed was. Ed and his wife Martha had been coming to church here. They were invited by Derek and Diane Sanders. And, Ed had been battling cancer and he had fought a good fight. And he and Martha, although they weren't members, we had become friends. He was, of course, one of Derek's best friends. I was able to have some really good conversations with Ed before he died. And I believe he was ready because he believed in Jesus since he was a young boy. And I think, like Charlie said, the only thing that matters is Jesus in all of this. So I'm going to ask y'all to do something that we don't do a lot of, but I want you to join me in a moment of silent prayer for Charlie Kirk's family, for those victims of that school shooting, for Ed's family and friends, and for this nation. So we're just going to take 1 minute, and I want you to pray silently. Thank you for indulging me. Now, as we start this new series, I want to ask you a question. What do you know about your name? Do any of you know the origins of your name, what it means, what the original meanings were? Have you ever researched its meaning. Now, I'm going to give you the information about my name because I know that you're on the edge of your seat wanting to find out what does my name mean, okay? So my name is Timothy Allen Turner. Now, Timothy in the original Greek is from Timotheus, which is a combination of time, which means honor, and theos, which means God. So my first name, Timothy, means either honoring God or honored by God. And it gained very much popularity in English-speaking countries, especially in the mid-20th century. And in the information I was reading said notably in the 1960s. I was born in 1960. So I am evidence of this. And then it says its usage has declined in recent years. Now I think we need to have a resurgence of the name Timothy. So if any of you are considering having babies and you find out that you're going to have a little boy, would you be willing to make a little commitment to me, okay? I'm going to name my boy Timothy. Let's see Timothy make a comeback, all right? Let's do it for Timothy. Now, my middle name is A-L-A-N, Allen, and it comes from Celtic origins, meaning little rock or handsome. Now I would choose handsome as the meaning. It may also be connected with an old Gaelic word meaning harmony or peace. And my last name, Turner, is derived from an old French word, tournier, which means lathe, right? It was bestowed upon craftsmen who worked on a lathe, turning things, right? Creating objects from wood, metal, or bone. So, based upon my name, I am a small, handsome rock who honors God while turning things, usually turning sermons into nap times, right? Yeah. So today we're starting this 7-week series, going through the Gospel of John and doing a deep dive into who Jesus is and what that means for us. What's in a name is sort of a conversation about the I am statements that Jesus made that are recorded in the Gospel of John, but it all has its roots in the Old Testament. Now, there were 7 statements that Jesus made, beginning with the I am. We don't have time to read all 7 of them. I hope that you will, but we're going to be able to look at about 5 of them during this series. And in the Greek language, in the New Testament, I am is ego eimi. And that's the way each of the 7 statements begins in the Gospel of John. But as I mentioned, the roots of that phrase go all the way back to Exodus chapter 3 and verse 14, where God introduced himself to Moses with the expression, I am who I am. And it is rendered in Hebrew, which of course has no vowels in it, as YHWH. And we usually pronounce that Yahweh. Later in Israel, the name Yahweh was considered so holy that you weren't even to pronounce it. And so they began to refer to God as simply the name, or in Hebrew, Hashem. Some rabbis taught that the name could not be pronounced, only breathed. And in keeping with that tradition, in the English translations of the Bible, it is usually rendered the word Yahweh as the Lord in all caps. The name also became a way to connect with God personally. Yes, God has a name, and it was used throughout Israel's history to convey that God always was, always is, and always will be. And so I am carries with it action as the first cause. The one for whom there is no prior cause. The one who makes things happen according to our deepest needs. And this becomes clear in the story of Moses as he encountered a burning bush that didn't burn, which is where our journey begins today. And again, I'm glad you're here today as we begin this series, because I believe it has the potential to change the way you relate to God and the way you see Jesus, because Jesus is the only thing that matters. And if you think about it, some names have powerful impact on people. I'm going to say some names, and if you know the name, raise your hand. Now, I think I'm going to say multiple names of people that you know, so we're going to use this to keep you awake during this time that I'm preaching. So if you know one name, you raise your right hand. If you know the next name, you raise your left hand. And you just keep going as I say the names, and we're going to have some exercise. We're going to get the blood flowing today, right? So, Elvis, Oprah, Cher, Madonna, Beyonce, Prince, Adele. I'm sort of tired. Whew. How about Jordan, Ali, Tiger, Brady, Marilyn, Clint, Spielberg, Einstein, Lincoln, Churchill, Mandela, Hitler. Wow. I didn't mean to do that on the... That was totally by accident. See, somebody would see that on the TV and they'd say, look, what are they doing? So when we hear these names, we have some reaction, either positive or negative, right? Now, by raising your hand, you're just saying, I know the name, not that you agree with whoever that person is. But you could say that there is power in that name. And if that's true of human names, how much more for God? I bring this up because names carry weight. They carry identity and purpose. And when God revealed his name to Moses in Exodus 3, he was not just giving information, he was giving an invitation. An invitation for Moses to know him and to trust him and to follow him. And many people, even many Christians, have a vague understanding of who God is. They might believe in God, but they feel disconnected from him. God seems distant, maybe unknowable, or uninterested in them. How do you have a relationship with someone who feels abstract to you? Jesus changed that in the Gospel of John when he stated 7 times, I am. He was declaring that he is Yahweh in the flesh, the personal God stepping into human history. He was not just telling us who God is, he was showing us. And so the big idea for our message today is this: God's name reveals his nature, and Jesus shows us the face behind the name. Now, we understand that Moses was born in Egypt when it was dangerous to be a baby boy, a baby Jewish boy in Egypt. Now, this was more than 400 years after Joseph had brought his extended family to Egypt during a time of great famine. And for a while they prospered. But eventually, whoever the Pharaoh was at that time did not remember who Joseph was. And all he knew was that the Jewish population was growing so fast that it concerned the Egyptian leaders. And so he gave orders that all male babies born to the Hebrew slaves were to be thrown into the Nile and drowned. So Moses' parents, when he was born, believed that he was special. And they tried to hide him until it was nearly impossible to do. Have you ever tried to keep a crying baby quiet? Anybody? You know, in church, oh, please don't be screaming. Well, Tim's preaching. Well, let the baby scream because it can keep people awake, okay? So his mother put him in a basket and she placed him in the Nile, but sent her daughter, Miriam, to sort of follow along, keep eyes on him, make sure he was okay. And in a providential way, Pharaoh's daughter came walking along, saw the baby in a basket, and decided to rescue him and take him home and raise him as sort of her own son. And as providence would have it, Pharaoh's daughter Miriam was standing there when Pharaoh's daughter saw her and said, I need somebody to help me with this baby, to nurse this baby. And Miriam says, I know somebody. And she got her mother, Moses' mother. And so he was really brought up by his own mother and protected because he was in Pharaoh's palace. And so as he grew up, it's obvious that she explained to him who he really was. Now you can imagine how confusing it would be to be raised almost like a prince of Egypt, but also know that your people are Hebrew slaves. So as a young man, Moses had an identity crisis and he had to make a choice. We begin reading in Hebrews 11:24. By faith, when he had grown up, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. So the first thing I want you to notice is Moses' good intentions. Moses had the right desire to defend his people, but he used the wrong method. He relied on his own strength, not on God. So in Exodus 2:11, we see in the story one day, after Moses had grown up, he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labor. And he saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. And looking this way and that, and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. And the next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting, and he asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" And the man said, "Well, who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" And then Moses was afraid and thought, what I did must have become known. And when Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. So we get the picture. One day he kills this Egyptian for mistreating his people, and his intention was probably good. He tried to accomplish God's purpose on his own power, though. And afterwards, even his own people didn't trust him. Who made you our ruler? What are you going to do, kill us? And so God had to humble Moses to show him the limitations, the complete inadequacy of his own strength and ability. And so God sent him to the backside of nowhere, a desert, to tend sheep for 40 years. He went from being a prince to a shepherd. And while he was there, at the end of that 40-year period, he had a life-changing encounter with God's presence in a burning bush. Now, we've all heard the old phrase, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. Anybody ever heard that phrase before? That phrase warns us that having good intentions isn't enough. We must follow through with right actions and wisdom. We come to realize that harm can be caused when we are naive or we have unexamined good intentions. We also recognize that failing to act on intentions is a real problem. We call that procrastination or negligence. And sometimes people say they have good intentions in order to justify their harmful decisions. Well, I meant well. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy announced the goal of landing a man on the moon by the end of the decade. Now, that was a bold intention, But without NASA's engineers and scientists and global cooperation, that dream would have remained just that, a dream. And I'm sure that some of you still think it was only a dream or fake. I get that, okay? But right intentions aren't enough without the right power and the right direction. What began as a story about a broken man in the wilderness became a revelation about the nature of God. Moses thought his life was over, but God was just getting started with him. Now, like Moses, many times we may need to learn about good intentions. He meant to forgive his dad until it was too late to say the words. She planned to start reading the Bible after life slowed down. He intended to call his friend who was battling cancer, but he never picked up the phone. They talked about giving generously, but they never wrote a check. She meant to say, I love you, and assumed there would be another chance. He wanted to get help for his addiction, just not today. They hoped to serve a church once things got less busy. She was going to apologize until pride got louder than her conscience. He meant to lead his family spiritually, but kept hitting the snooze button. She promised to pray for her friend and forgot by lunch. Friends, good intentions without God's direction lead to dead ends. God needed to step in and wake Moses up. And I think God had a purpose for Moses that even his parents saw. They didn't understand it all, but they knew there was something about this baby. And he tried to do it on his own, and it backfired. And so when Pharaoh came after him, and he ran for the hills, and again, he's gone for 40 years, and after 40 years on the run, it was time for God to call Moses to his intended purpose. And here's where I want you to notice Moses' objections when God comes to him and tells Moses, this is what I intend for you to do. Moses has some excuses. Now, Moses would be going about his business, doing what he did every day, when suddenly God blew up his life. And isn't that the way it is with God? I mean, you just be going about your day, and all of a sudden, something happens, and God just blows up your day, maybe blows up your week, maybe blows up your life in a good way. In Exodus 3, we begin reading in verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And there an angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. And so Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. And when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses says, here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for this place you are standing, where you are standing is holy ground. And then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. And at this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, God's purpose for Moses was to save his people. And again, I think God had providentially put Moses in Pharaoh's household for this reason. Who knows what would have happened if Moses had have waited patiently for God's leading had he not murdered the Egyptian. But God can still bring about his purpose. However, Moses wasn't sure of this. After all, he had fled Egypt. And so instead of jumping at this idea, Moses objected. Verse 11, we see that Moses said, but Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" And God said, "I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." And Moses said to God, "Suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your fathers has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' Then what shall I say to them?" And God said to Moses, "I am who I am. This is what you were to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you." God also said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, 'The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation.'" So there's two key questions that Moses asked. Who am I and who are you? Right? I mean, it sort of makes sense. Who am I? You know, have you ever used that one before? Well, who am I? I mean, you don't want me doing this. I'm a nobody. It's great because it gets you out of the assignment, but you still sound humble, right? Interestingly, God never even answers that question. Did you notice that in the text? God didn't even answer the question. He just says, "I'll be with you." In essence, this is not about you, Moses. It's about me. It doesn't matter who you are. It only matters who I am. Let that sink in for a moment, friends. Jesus is the only thing that matters. And his second objection was, "Well, who are you?" Now, this question sort of makes sense. I don't know what kind of relationship Moses had with God. I mean, he obviously believed in God, but I don't know that he had a very close relationship with him. Moses is at, "What is your name? If the people ask me, who am I supposed to say is sending me?" Well, the descendants of Abraham living in Egypt had only a distant memory of the God of their forefathers. After 400 plus years, they probably had adopted many of the polytheistic worship practices of their Egyptian rulers. They needed to be reintroduced to Elohim, the God Most High. And so when Moses asked for God's name, God says, "I am who I am." In Hebrew, it comes out as Yahweh, which is a form of the verb to be. Tell them, "I am sent you." Now, there's a story about Corrie ten Boom, the Dutch Christian whose family hid Jews during World War II, and eventually they were captured and sent off to concentration camps. But she remembered one day when she asked her father how she would have the strength to endure suffering. And he said, "Corrie, when we take the train, when do I give you your ticket?" And she said, "Right before I get on." And he said, "Exactly." And that's how God works. When you need strength, he gives it, not before. It's not about who you are. It's about who is with you, who he is. And that's why Moses needed to have the right answer. It reveals four very important things about God. First of all, Yahweh is the only one of his kind. There is no equal to God. We use names to distinguish someone from others of their kind. But there are no other gods but God alone. There isn't anyone like I am. Sometimes we try to make it like Satan and God are sort of equal. Satan's the evil and God is the good. And no. Satan is not equal to God. God stands alone. Secondly, Yahweh's existence has no extension in time. God is eternal, and He lives outside of time in the eternal now. There has never been a time when God did not exist, and there will never come a time when God ceases to exist. God always is. Scripture says there is coming a time when time shall be no more, but God will continue to be. And everything else in the universe has limits, including time itself, but not God. God is the first cause, the unmoved mover, and the great I am. And the third thing we learn about God is this: Yahweh is always the same. And Scripture is pretty clear about this. In Hebrews 13:3, we read, Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. Malachi chapter 3 and verse 6, I, the Lord, do not change. And so you, the descendants of Jacob, are not destroyed. In James chapter 1 and verse 17, we read, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. And finally, in Numbers 23:19, we read, God is not human, that He should lie, not a human being, that He should change His mind. So the same God that Moses answered to, we answer to. The same God who called Moses at that burning bush calls us. And so when God calls you, you know who He is. He is the I am. He never changes. And the fourth thing we can gather from this is that Yahweh is the one with the power to act on people's behalf. He is the one who makes things happen according to our greatest need. And so Jesus' use of the expression I am would have an unmistakable signal to His hearers. They knew the ancient significance of the words. Even in the Greek, ego eimi, Jesus was explicitly identifying Himself with God and bearing God's presence on earth. The theological term is incarnation, which literally means the enfleshment of God. But we need to back up even further to fully grasp what that means. God is not just up there somewhere, He is right here. I am means always present, always faithful, always enough. In Colossians 1, we learn that Jesus, again, is the I am. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in Him were created all things in heaven and on earth. Daniel referred to the one he saw in a vision as the Son of Man. This is the phrase Jesus most frequently used to identify Himself, and is likely based on a verse from Daniel's prophecy in Daniel 7:13 through 14. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into His presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and peoples of every language worshiped Him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and His kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. The only thing that matters is Jesus. Jesus fully embodies the I am identity in Himself. And that is why Jesus could say, before Abraham was, I am, in John chapter 8 and verse 58. You may also remember that after Jesus' ascension, recorded in Acts 1, 9 through 11, an angel appeared next to the disciples as they gaze after the rising figure. And the angel says, "Why are you standing here staring up into heaven?" And friends, most of us have been doing that ever since, just straining to find the historical Jesus up there, or maybe just straining to see him coming back again. Where did he go? We've been obsessed with that question because apparently, we look at the universe as sort of divided heaven and earth. But it really is one universe. Everything within it has been transformed by the glory of God. The whole point of the incarnation and the resurrection is that the Christ is here and always was. But now we have a story that allows us to imagine that it just might be true. Jesus didn't go anywhere. I mean, we say he's in heaven, but he is still Lord of all. In his first sermon on the day of Pentecost, Peter told the crowd, God has made him both Lord and Christ. And in John 16:7, Jesus told his disciples, it's good for you that I go away. Unless I go away, the Comforter will not come to you. But if I go, I will send him to you. And then Paul's wonderful declaration in Philippians 2:9. Therefore, God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name Hashem, that is above every name. And also in Ephesians 1:9-10, and he made known to us the mystery of his will according to his good pleasure, which he purposed in Christ to be put into effect when the times will have reached their fulfillment, to bring all things in heaven and on earth together under one head, even Christ. If Jesus is the I am, how does that affect our objections? And we do have objections, When God calls us, we have objections like Moses did. When I say, I'm not a good parent, Jesus says, I am your wisdom in every conversation with your child. God can help us. When I whisper, I can't face another day of caregiving, Jesus says, I am your strength when you are empty. When I panic, I don't know how we're going to pay the bills, Jesus says, I am your provider. When I fear I'll never beat this addiction, Jesus says, I am your deliverer. When I groan, my marriage is falling apart, Jesus says, I am the restorer of broken things and the one who heals. When I sob, I've lost someone I love, Jesus says, I am the resurrection and the life. When I stress, I don't know what to do with my future, Jesus says, I am the way. When I confess I've messed up too badly, Jesus says, I am your forgiveness and grace. When I doubt I'm not spiritual enough to serve, Jesus says, I am with you always. And when I say I'm too tired to keep going, Jesus says, I am your rest and your renewal. Think about the power of the I am. And once again, as Charlie Kirk said, the only thing that matters is Jesus Christ. I hope you know who he is. I hope you have a relationship with him today. In fact, I would say to you, don't let this day pass before you get right with Jesus, because he is the only thing that matters. Before we go into our communion time, I want to just leave you with a couple of questions. If God's name is I am, what does that say about your identity? Are you living as if he is enough? And the second question is this: if you fully trust in the I am, how would it really change your life? Think on those things, and in just a moment, we'll come together for communion.